Hey everyone, welcome back to Manga Minute. I'm thrilled to share my latest recap video with you. If you missed the previous one, no worries, just take a quick peek in the description below for the link. Now, let's dive right in and enjoy.
He wasn't allowed to show himself to the esteemed guests of the clan. His presence, it seemed, was a blemish, an ill omen that his father sought to hide. His mind raced back to the tragic circumstances of his birth, a burden he had carried his entire life. The whispers of his mother's death, tied so closely to his own entrance into the world, had shadowed him from the start. Was this the reason he was cast aside, forbidden from standing among his family during such an important event? The steward, standing nearby with a bowed head, had conveyed the message without emotion. It wasn't the steward's fault, Yunshin knew, but the sting of his father's decision cut deeper than anything else. The patriarch's word was final, and it seemed even now, after all these years, the blame for his mother's death still hung over him like a curse. Yunshin muttered the words to himself, as if speaking them aloud would make the truth easier to accept. His father had ordered this. The realization twisted painfully inside him, though he tried to push the bitterness away. Stepping out from the training hall, Yunshin paused, his eyes narrowing as he considered the scene unfolding before him. His father's orders still weighed on him, but the desire to witness greatness gnawed at his thoughts. Perhaps, if he watched from afar, he could still learn something from the martial masters. After all, such figures were rare, and their presence would offer insight that could never be found in mere texts or isolated practice. The atmosphere in the manor was thick with anticipation, the crowd buzzing with excitement. As they waited for the arrival of the guests, murmurs rippled through the gathered onlookers. "I wonder who's here today," one voice speculated. "Probably not the Sky Sword Dragon," another replied, adding a note of disbelief. "Maybe an elder? If people of that caliber really visited our clan, it would be a tremendous honor," another voice chimed in, as if the very idea was too lofty to consider. Before the speculation could go further, a sudden shout came from the front of the manor. "The martial masters of the Zhongnan sect have arrived." The guard's booming voice cut through the noise, bringing an abrupt silence over the crowd. All eyes turned toward the entrance as the honored guests made their way inside. Leading the group was a woman with striking features, pointed ears that marked her as belonging to the noble race, a lineage known for their mystical prowess and rare appearances in human territories. She was flanked by two men, both carrying themselves with the unmistakable grace and discipline of seasoned martial artists. The crowd erupted once more, but this time in hushed awe. "A noble race," someone whispered. "A noble race is here." From the back of the crowd, Yunshin watched with widening eyes, struggling to process what he was witnessing. The woman before him, with her pointed ears and ethereal presence, was of the noble race, a being long spoken of in ancient texts, a mysterious people believed to be immortal. They were figures humans revered as deities, creatures beyond the reach of time, their lifespans seemingly endless. As he observed her, he could feel the overwhelming energy radiating from her, the core energy of her body exuding effortlessly into the air around her, a sign of profound martial mastery. Meanwhile, at the forefront of the gathering, Jum Daemyeong, the patriarch of the Jung clan, greeted the guests with a mixture of pride and deference. His voice carried over the hushed crowd as he expressed his honor at their visit. Bowing deeply, he introduced himself with all the formality expected of his position. Yet, even as the words left his mouth, the nervous tension in his demeanor betrayed his awe. He hadn't expected to host a member of such exalted status. The woman, Yeo Il-shin, introduced herself with a humility that seemed almost out of place for one of her stature. An elder of the Zhongnan sect, a noble race no less, her very presence commanded respect. Her voice was calm, her tone modest as she accepted the patriarch's welcome. Jum Daemyeong's thoughts, however, were far from calm. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what stood before him. A noble race elder? He hadn't recognized the true depth of her identity. His apology came swiftly, his voice trembling with an uncharacteristic nervousness, as he implored forgiveness for his ignorance. He was in the presence of a being that humans saw as near divine. Yeo Il-shin, however, was gracious. She spoke gently, instructing the patriarch to rise, dismissing the need for such reverence. She had not come to flaunt her status or seek worship. Her purpose here was different. Jum Dae-myung, still rattled, expressed his regret at leaving such distinguished guests waiting at the gates. The thought of the sword deities of the Jongnan sect, known for their legendary martial prowess, being delayed outside his manor only deepened his sense of inadequacy. Quickly, he ushered them inside, his composure slowly returning as he fulfilled his duties as host. Yeonshin, standing on the outskirts, absorbed every word and gesture. His father, humbled before this noble race elder, had only added to the overwhelming sense of awe that already filled the air. Yeonshin's thoughts spun wildly. Not only was she of the noble race, but she also held the esteemed title of elder within the Jongnan sect. How long had she lived? The question lingered in his mind, echoing the myths he had read as a child. These beings were said to witness centuries pass like fleeting moments. What secrets, what ancient knowledge did she hold? As the guests were led inside the grand halls of the Jung Manor, Jum Dae-myung took the lead, his voice filled with pride as he ushered them forward. The manor's elegance was displayed for all to see, every step echoing through the lavish corridors as servants bowed in reverence to the esteemed visitors. Yeo Il-shin, ever observant, let her gaze wander over the gathered crowd. Her attention, however, was soon drawn to a figure standing at the periphery, watching from a distance. Her eyes settled on Yeonshin, the third son of the Jung family. There was something about him, a spark in his eyes that stood out, something different from the rest. Noticing her gaze, Jum Dae-myung swiftly addressed it, attempting to explain the boy's presence. He introduced Yeonshin with an apologetic tone, his words tinged with embarrassment. Though acknowledging his son, the patriarch could not hide his disappointment. To him, Yeonshin was a constant source of trouble, a reminder of his wife's tragic passing and a child marked by misfortune. His troubled past, compounded by his fragile health, had made him an outcast within the family, his presence often regarded as an ill omen. Despite Jum Dae-myung's attempt to dismiss his son, Yeo Il-shin's eyes lingered on the boy a moment longer. There was something more to him, something beyond the surface. His bright, intelligent gaze told a different story than the one his father painted. Back in the training hall, the atmosphere was thick with determination as Yeonshin contemplated his next steps. He picked up a sword, its weight feeling familiar yet foreign in his grip. The blade glinted in the dim light, reflecting his thoughtful expression. Today's encounter with the martial masters of the Jongnan sect had sparked something within him, igniting a new sense of purpose. Yeonshin reflected on the energy he had witnessed, the flowing, vibrant auras of the masters, imbued with power and skill. He had trained diligently in the Jung clan's movement arts, but he felt as if he had reached a plateau, a dead end where his growth had stagnated. The challenges and limits of his current training weighed heavily on his mind. With the sword in hand, he felt a rush of resolve. Perhaps this new path was the answer he sought. The idea of training with swords intrigued him. It promised not just a physical challenge, but also an opportunity to push beyond the confines of his previous training. As the day faded into a tranquil evening at Jung Manor, the ambiance was serene, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered in the air. Yeo Il-shin, with her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, noted the abundant earth energy that pulsed through the estate. One of her subordinates, a keen observer, voiced his admiration, recognizing the manor's potential as a coveted stronghold for those seeking power, particularly the notorious Tyrant Sword Tribe. Yeo Il-shin, embodying her composed demeanor, acknowledged the looming threat. She understood that the Tyrant Sword Tribe would undoubtedly seek to harness the energy of this land. However, she was acutely aware of the cost that would come with a confrontation. Planning a counterattack could lead to dire consequences, potentially sacrificing the very clan that had welcomed her and her companions. Her subordinate, filled with confidence, suggested a more aggressive approach, striking preemptively to annihilate the threat before it could escalate. Yeo Il-shin considered this, weighing the risks and rewards. It would be ideal to eliminate the danger before it reached their walls, but she knew that the Tyrant Sword Tribe was not to be underestimated. Among them was a particularly troublesome faction known as the 13 Skies, whose reputation for ruthlessness and skill was well known. Determined to maintain vigilance, Yeo Il-shin reminded her team to remain sharp and prepared for anything. The atmosphere thickened with a sense of urgency, as they understood that the path ahead would demand both cunning and strength. Yeo Il-shin sipped her tea. The delicate aroma filled her senses, offering a brief respite from the complexities of the day. Yet, her thoughts wandered back to the peculiar boy she had encountered earlier at Jung Manor. In a sea of faces, he had stood out, not just for his youthful demeanor, but for an inexplicable energy that seemed to radiate from him. As night fell, Yunshin sat in deep meditation, his mind focused but troubled. Despite his intense concentration, an unsettling realization washed over him. It was strange, his Baihui acupoint, the central energy point at the top of his head, felt disturbingly open. This sudden clarity puzzled him. A year had passed since he had last meditated, his focus entirely consumed by mastering the physical arts of the Jung clan's movement techniques. Yet now, the flow of energy surging through his head was more intense than ever. A creeping dread began to grow in Yunshin's chest as he pondered the implications. If this energy continued to flood unchecked, he estimated he had less than 5 years before he would lose control of his consciousness entirely, his mind lost in the overwhelming force. Worse still, if that happened, he feared it would mean the end of his life altogether. The fear settled deeply into him, even as he stood up and finished his meditation. Stepping out of the room, Yunshin gazed into the night sky, his thoughts swirling. He had mastered the Jung clan's movement arts completely, an achievement that should have filled him with confidence and strength. But now, it feels meaningless in the face of this internal crisis. He was scared. Was there truly nothing he could do to stop this? Suddenly, an ominous sensation rippled through him, his instincts flaring to life. Something was wrong. A dark energy emanated from somewhere nearby, and the air around him thickened with tension. Yunshin's hand went instinctively to his sword, and without hesitation he moved to investigate. The night was eerily silent as he approached the gates of the Jung clan manor. The closer he got, the stronger the scent of blood became, hanging heavy in the cool night air. A sinking feeling churned in his gut. Something was terribly off. As he reached the gates, the sight that greeted him sent a shock through his system. Lifeless bodies were strewn across the ground, blood pooling around them. The courtyard was filled with silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind, and the scene before him painted a brutal picture of violence and death. Yunshin scanned the area quickly, his heart racing. It was a trap formation. Something had been set in motion here, and he had been completely unaware of it until now. The victims scattered before him were all members of the Jung clan, his comrades and kin. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the massacre. Whoever had orchestrated this attack must possess overwhelming martial prowess, a level of strength far beyond what he had anticipated. How had this gone unnoticed? How could something like this have happened within the walls of the Jung clan's own manor? Yunshin stood amidst the carnage, his grip tightening around his sword. His mind swirled with questions, fear, and anger. But one thing was clear. Whoever had done this was still out there, and they were dangerous beyond measure. As the attackers scoured the area, their eyes fell on a boy standing amid the blood-soaked courtyard. A mocking voice broke the silence, dripping with derision. They had expected no survivors, yet here was one, standing alone. The sneers deepened as they took note of the boy's youth and apparent vulnerability. One of them remarked on the boy's foolishness for showing himself, predicting his imminent demise. From the group, a bald man with a menacing presence stepped forward, his eyes cold and indifferent. He wasn't moved by the sight of the young survivor. His orders were clear, and he had no personal stake in the matter. With deliberate, heavy steps, he approached Yunshin, his lips moving in a low murmur as if offering an empty apology, before raising his arm to strike. His movements were confident, expecting this to be a quick end. But the moment he swung his arm, Yunshin moved faster than the man could react. With a swift, fluid motion, Yunshin's hand shot up, grabbing the man's wrist mid-swing. There was no hesitation, no wasted effort. With a twist of his wrist, Yunshin sent the bald man crashing into the ground, incapacitating him with a single decisive move. The force and precision of the counterattack were startling, and the man's body lay crumpled, his defeat almost too quick to comprehend. As the group of attackers witnessed their comrade being effortlessly overpowered, a wave of alarm rippled through them. Without hesitation, they drew their swords, the metallic sounds slicing through the tense air. Their faces hardened with fury, demanding to know the identity of the boy who had so easily brought down one of their own. Yunshin, however, remained composed. His expression was calm, his movements deliberate as he prepared his own blade. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet resolve. He was not just any survivor caught in the chaos. He was the third son of the very clan they had attacked. The weight of his words matched his poised stance, ready to defend his fallen kin and confront those who had dared to spill Jung clan blood.